I have a confession to make. While painting the model in this video, I was racking my brain about what the video should be about. Maybe how to paint display models, maybe how to compose a color scheme, maybe how to achieve godhood status by brush licking. Okay, well, maybe not that one. YouTube trains content creators to have a well-defined purpose for each video. This gives you clear direction for your thumbnail and title, which I'm sure you've heard more than once is extremely important. Part of the reason why it's so important is because the thumbnail and title promise something to the viewer. And when their expectations align with what the video delivers on, videos do especially well when that kept promise is something super cool, like painting for 38 hours straight, or painting a whole army in 2 days. You know, the kind of things that no normal person would do, but it's cool to watch in a 12-minute video. The YouTube space has changed a ton since I started making videos 7.5 years ago. The viewers and also the content being made. Just painting a model doesn't feel like it's unique enough or well-defined enough of a topic for a video to really stand out. But screw it, let's do it anyways. In this video, I'm painting Cassandra from Chimera's newest Kickstarter, which you'll hear more about later. We'll begin the painting process with the skin and the cloth, as the approach is very similar. The purpose of this video that I originally settled on and ultimately abandoned was how to paint white and other pale colors, because I share the same problems, really. I want a painter's skin to end up a very pale purple and the fabric to be really close to white, and in order to do that, I need to do two things. One, I need to begin from somewhere that isn't dark. I airbrushed the skin with a mixture of purple and pastel violet and painted the cloth vampire flesh and ardent green. This step cannot be understated. If you start too dark, you'll never highlight up to that bright color you're going for. If you do manage to, the character's features will often look very harshly defined, which is what I'm not going for often when painting a character like this. Did I hear someone ask why this is the case? Well, no, I'm alone in my office, but that probably is the part of my brain that has the clinical need to over-explain everything, so let's just go with it. The problem with starting from a color that's too dark when trying to work up to white is you need a lot of intermediate layers in between those two to transition to that color. By the end of that transition, when you finally get to the color you actually care about, in this case white, the amount of area you have to work is so tiny that the overall effect of that color on your paint scheme is very diminished. And instead of hitting white, you end up hitting something in between, like a pale pastel purple or a pink. Now, if you're really good at layering and you're able to do a little bit of each layer and have a ton of white at the end, you still have this dark border surrounding every single volume on your model, around the nostrils, around the cheeks, around the creases in the elbows, and it still looks really defined. Knowing how dark you can start definitely takes some trial and error, so don't worry if you mess it up a couple of times. I certainly have. I'd err on the side of base coating with too bright a color because it's easier to darken down something versus brighten it up. The second important step is you need to slowly, and I mean slowly, build up highlights. I will very often paint a second layer of highlights with the same exact mixture of paints. Here's an in-between shot of highlighting twice with the exact same paint.
But why is this the case, oh mighty YouTuber?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I guess it's time for another overly verbose chalkboard sequence. One of the issues with people's perception of painting is they tend to think of applying layers of paint like you are using the paint bucket tool in Microsoft Paint. There's my white color over a black background, easy. When in reality, it kind of looks more like this. You can see how with each layer of baking paper, effectively the same layer of paint, you get more and more coverage over a black undercoat. Similarly with paint, you can use the same layer of paint and get a transition building up more and more layers of opacity over whatever your undercoat is. When you do eventually mix paints to get another highlight, and I'm just adding titanium white each time, you gotta add a tiny bit. The steps in between each layer of paint need to be gradual. Obviously, this can be true for all types of paints, but brighter paints like white or pale purple especially benefit from this. People often describe their white painting efforts as chalky, and I believe that's because they're trying to build up a bright color too quickly and not giving each layer of paint the time of day. Transparent white over a dark undercoat looks like absolute trash, and it's especially hard to get opacity the darker the base coat you're painting over. At a certain point, I get close enough to white that I use pure white in very small highlights. You can see how bright white paint compares to the final mixed highlight that I used. When people think of the color white, but Scott, white isn't a color, it's a combination of all the colors. Look, that only really makes sense in an additive color system, and paint is more of the problem with being a know-it-all is that you attract other know-it-alls, and the comment section just becomes a who can be more technically correct war zone, and I'm here for it. Where was I? People think of white in its purest sense, but in reality, white is largely shades of gray and other colors, and only the maximum highlight is pure white. Remember that this paint also applies translucently, so you need a couple of layers, and also white paint dims while it cures. You may come back on day 2 and need to reapply some of that cream to brighten it up. It's worth mentioning that I have literally never done that step because ain't no one got time for that. I've linked down in the description my favorite white paint to use in this capacity if you want to pick it up, along with other hobby tools and supplies that I prefer. Let's review. You want to start bright so you have room to grow into your bright highlight and it doesn't look weird and overdefined. And you want to gradually build your highlights, making sure each layer reaches opacity. All right, now I expect to never see another question about chalky whites ever again. Before drowning you in more info, let's hear a brief word from this video's sponsor. Chimera is running a new Kickstarter campaign named Tenebra, Nightmares of Ilia, which is currently live and fully funded. The model you're watching me paint in this very video is Asandra and is available in the campaign. The models come in 75mm and 38mm scale depending on your preferences. Both are cast in high quality resin that allow the loving detail put into these sculpts to really shine, and holy cow is there an insane amount of detail packed into these figures. I also appreciate how the models come with a couple of options for assembly. Asandra here has 3 heads she's supplied with depending on what vibe you're going for. The campaign has already been fully funded, meaning some of the goodies have been unlocked. Free tutorials, conversion bits, a discount code for PegasuWorld.com, but the add-ons, oh baby, the add-ons! Chimera is most famously known for their paints, and they're again introducing more colors to the range during this campaign with 2 brand new Chimera Colors signature sets. The first set is Skin Colors designed by Mark Mesclans, and the second is Pastel Notes by Massimilian Ricciero. Both sets contain 6 colors and come with a booklet explaining how to replicate the techniques used by the artist. On top of all that goodness, you can add on a video masterclass by either Mark Mesclans, where he paints the Asteria bust, or the Asteria mounted masterclass by Eric Swinson. If you're interested in getting your hands on these exciting products, they're all discounted during the Kickstarter campaign, but you need to act now as the campaign closes on May 31st with no option for late pledges. Link in the description below. A big thank you to Chimera for sponsoring this episode. Now back to overloading you with too much information. Okay, right now I can feel the reservations. You're like, damn, that's a lot of work. But we can make it simpler. On the rest of the skin and the large amount of fabric, I instead painted very scratchy layers of highlights, not caring a ton about opacity. And then later, came in with my airbrush and applied 3 colors. I first began with my midtone to soften all the crappy transitions. I then used pure titanium white ink to boost up the highlights. And finally, I came in with a shadow color to push down some of the highlight that got a little too crazy. Bada bing, bada boom! With a little light glazing to define smaller volumes on the legs, I polished the rest of the fabric and skin off significantly faster than the face and torso area using this simple airbrush hack. Ooh, maybe I should call the video that. Paint white super simple with this one hack! The internet loves hacks. Now, one area you may get tripped up is with fun colors. Because white is a neutral color, you can shade it with other hues. You don't always need to use gray. Because my vampire skin is a magenta color, I'm using a kind of greenish color to contrast nicely with that skin tone. You may think a great way to pull this off is by base coating your fabric with a greenish color, and I want you to take that idea and throw it in the trash. White is such a fussy little and it's very easy to overmix a color into your base coat, and suddenly you're painting sage instead of white by the end of all your highlighting. It's better to build up a more neutral transition of colors and then glaze in a fun color at the end. Check out my video on glazing if you need more help with that technique. You can really sneak up on the end result you want versus baking it into the paint job and having no recourse to fix it other than by repainting the model. And let's be honest, you aren't gonna repaint that part. You're just gonna tell everybody else that you intended on it being sage instead of white. Don't lie to me. Wow, I've spent 3 pages of script talking about painting the skin and cloth. Time to move on. For the metals, I busted out my favorite TMM combo, the golds from Scale 75 and the silvers from AK Interactive. I painted all the things that would eventually be gold with a dark forest green color and then applied each of these golds as layers of highlights, making sure to leave behind some color with each step to create a transition. For the silver, I tried something a little different. Y'all know about my undying love for Tamiya Clear. This time, instead of eating an entire paint pot, I mixed it to a thin consistency with Tamiya X20A, they're thinner, and washed it onto the silver, and god diggity damn did it work super nicely. I'm sure I'm not the first person to discover this, but this is the first time that I've tried it, and it certainly won't be the last. I applied some basic highlights with the bright silvers from AK, but it was nothing special, so we won't linger there for too long. The last thing I want to talk about is the dragon scales. I've been really digging freehand lately, so I wanted to experiment with it more on this model. With the helmet wings this large, this lady has got to be some kind of dragon master, and I wanted to continue that motif. If you need help with freehand, check out my video on the subject where I go into a lot of detail, as per usual. I looked up a basic pattern and tried to copy it. I shaded near the top of each scale like it was under the previous layer to give it a 3D look. I also highlighted near the tip of each scale to further enunciate that same idea. It's a good idea when freehanding thin lines to mix your paint with a similar colored ink to get good opacity, but also good flow. I'm applying the tiniest amount of pressure with my brush to make sure my lines are ultra thin, but still paint flows off my brush super nicely, and ink helps with that a lot. Ooh, look at that recessed shade. Oh God, oh goddamn, oh God. Here's one more freehand tip. Practice on a part of the model that's inconspicuous before going full ham. I did more of this dragon scale freehanding on the cloth lower on the model just to make the helmet feel like it belongs more in the scheme. And that's a Sandra, Dragon Master, complete. I know what viewers in the comment section will say. I'm gonna get comments telling me that they love it when I just paint a model without making a spectacle of it. And I get it. This video is for you. The problem with that is that the hobby space is already insanely niche enough, and standard vanilla videos of mini painting and the people that appreciate them are even more niche. Call it the Russian doll phenomenon. It feels like in 2023, I need to gamify the content a bit to add in a bit of extra spice, and honestly, I don't mind that most times. Even for myself, I need to change up what I paint, how I edit, how I present, etc. to keep it interesting. Every once in a while, however, it is nice just to paint a mini and talk about it. That's going to do it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, I'll link one at the end. That's going to do it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed this video, I'll link a similar one at the end of the video in case you want more. If you want to support the channel, there are many ways to do that. Namely, if you're a fan of purple vampires, I got a nice one for you named The Duchess, and also a digital course that teaches you how to paint the model in that purple skin tone, stroke for stroke. If you like over-explained detail, well, that masterclass course is basically made for you. You can also support me on Patreon, where you get access to my Discord, where you and I can hang out and chat about your miniature painting projects, or how the Bee Movie and Citizen Kane are both 3 out of 5 stars. Subscribe or die! But most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!